Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Sometimes the best way to find a living is to stay right where you are and study with UAS online. Career-specific distance programs from the University of Alaska Southeast are the fastest way to increase your earning power.
We connect all over the world.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, jumping the gun on June just a bit. It is not the 1st of June. It's still the 31st, so if you're wondering, oh, what's going on? Yeah, I got the date wrong. I want it to be June. I like June. June's a good month. Call the Weather Info line anytime at 800-472-0391. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. And if you want to get the daily afternoon map briefing, you can do that as well. Around 4 o'clock, just type in NWS Anchorage, and you'll get that daily afternoon briefing in video form, or you can just get the audio if that's easier for you from our website at weather.gov/Alaska. You can find your information there anytime. Let's take a look at some interesting stuff here. This is a kind of a strange angle of Alaska. Here's the northern coastline. There's Barrow and Wainwright all the way around to the Seward Peninsula. You know, it's kind of stretched out here. This particular satellite view has kind of the long, skinny view shooting up and toward the horizon. So in this case, we're looking at the really top and the last part of the satellite image. So it looks a little strange here. And so pardon the kind of the stretch and distortion. But the important part is here that a lot of what we're seeing across the north is sea ice and clouds across the Arctic. But there is a huge open area of water across the Beaufort Sea. And this is the important part here. This is probably a really early opening across the Beaufort Seacoast. So this is yesterday's picture. It's changed a little bit. There are a few more clouds today, but the effect is the same. There's a large area of open water, and we'll talk about that in the sea ice analysis coming up here in the marine section a little bit later on in the show. So stay tuned for that and watch for more information in the coming days about what this may mean for the Beaufort Seacoast communities. In the meantime, as you well know, fire danger is high across many areas in Alaska, all the way from the Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas and into the upper headwaters of both the Yukon and the Kuskokwim, especially with the fire going right now across the upper Kuskokwim Valley, around the Seward Peninsula and northward, and also across the middle Yukon Valley, even extreme fire danger in some cases there, including areas around Palmer and up into the Copper River Basin toward Tenita Pass and eastward. So conditions are favorable for many communities to have that at least elevated fire danger. Be careful and be responsible with fire in your community and help keep your part of Alaska safe as we go through the wildfire season. Here's a look at the satellite picture, and the visible satellite is where we start today. You'll notice a lot of cloud cover developing in the afternoon across the upper Yukon and the Copper River Basin down into the Alaska Range, and then south and west. Things just dry up. There's a lot of dry air across a large part of the central and western sections of Alaska with several waves of low pressure, one of them south of Sitka, drawing in moisture across southeast. Rainfall there today, as well as parts of Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula region, as well as the eastern Aleutians. Another wave of low pressure. You can see it kind of spinning right here and out across the western Bering. Watch the motion one more time, and you'll see that all these areas of low pressure are all down across the south. We have high pressure across the midsections of the state, and then what you don't see, because we're missing parts of the scan on the visible sector, is a colder round of air dropping southward. So here's high pressure gradually bringing in that warm air, and now by the time it drops southward, we're back into that cold flow. And colder air has been working across the coastal plain and into the Brooks Range today. It's not going to be unheard of to see snow across the Brooks Range and probably the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast as we get into the next 24 hours and maybe even the following day. So colder air is dropping south. You can see the clouds building up around the middle Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley as a result of that new northerly wind pushing southward. In the meantime, conditions are still going to be warm for south central, southwest, southeast, and even the west coast, where temps in the lower and middle Yukon Valley could probably be upper 60s to mid 70s easily again. Norton Sound and Seward Peninsula all going to be warm. On the infrared satellite loop, once again, you can see that the main storm track activity is just kind of isolated across the southern third of the state, with the even more pronounced storm track even out of our view here. So things are just kind of cut off and slowly drifting around a little bit, trying to find some purpose in life without having any main storm track direction pushing these things through Alaska. You'll see that on the jet stream map here in just a few minutes. Today's weather shows that cold front up north and along the northern coast. We have a few showers there from Point Lay to areas up around Point Hope, also around the Barrow, and then south and west some pockets of light rainfall around the Resurrection Bay southward toward Kodiak Island. Here's that wave of low pressure across southeast, and you can see that southerly flow has been working moisture northward. Not a whole lot of rain with that. I think Sitka picked up about 1/10 of an inch today. Places like Kodiak saw a little bit closer to 1/4 inch. Cordova about 1/3 of an inch. Dutch Harbor saw even more rainfall today, about 1 inch or so, falling in the eastern chain. But by and large, most of the rainfall was on the southern third. As we get into tonight, that front's going to start dropping a little bit further southward. Probably won't make it to Eagle tonight, maybe by early morning tomorrow. In the meantime, light rainfall still possible for parts of southeast, around southern sections of the Kenai Peninsula, Homer, and into Kachemak Bay, as well as Kodiak Island, and maybe over to Chignik. Out around the Yukon Valley and into the Kuskokwim Delta region, you're looking at showers possible there, and then a band of rainfall will probably lift northward, maybe hovering very close to St. Paul, probably not as far north as St. Matthew. And rain will encircle this wave of low pressure across the eastern chain. That's at 994 millibars. It'll keep things unsettled and kind of murky for a while tonight. As we get into tomorrow, watch for areas of freezing fog in the morning, especially across the Chukchi Seacoast and eastward. There'll be a better chance that that'll be a little more substantial in the form of very light snow, maybe flurries across the coast, and light snow showers will be possible across the eastern Brooks Range, especially the north-facing slopes there, where temperatures will be the coldest in the morning. Now, by the afternoon, we expect this colder air dropping southward, along with the heat of the day, along with the moisture that's already there. It will help to bubble up more showers and thunderstorms across the upper Yukon Valley, 40-mile country, probably westward toward the Alaska Range and south. In the meantime, light rainfall for parts of southeast, southwestern Alaska will see a better chance of showers, and many areas across the west coast, Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, and even the Copper River Basin are going to see plenty of sunshine. Same goes for Prince William Sound. Thursday, slightly wetter conditions across the Gulf in the north and the east. Showers across the western Alaska Range, Bristol Bay, and down into the eastern chain. There's your showers and thunderstorms again. And notice that frontal boundary, that leading edge of colder air, has just kind of crept southward just a little bit more. So it doesn't look like it's going to surge southward across the Gulf of Alaska, but it's trying. But it's having a hard time working into that very warm and stable air that many of us have seen across the coastal regions for the last week or two now. And across southeast today, we see readings back in the mid to upper 50s for many. Haines and Skagway, one of the warmer spots, in the lower to mid 60s today. 61 around Yakutat, upper 50s around Prince William Sound around the 2 o'clock hour. 62 in Kenai, upper 60s around Talkeetna and Squentna, and almost 70 by early afternoon in Fairbanks. 71 in Eagle, 72 for Fort Yukon, the north coast. Looking at temps in the lower 30s, all stations except Kaktovik made it above freezing by 2 o'clock today. 50s and 60s around Kotzebue Sound. Shishmaref looking a little and suspiciously cool, but certainly possible. If you look out toward Wales and Tin City, you can see that colder air hugging the coast there, so it does look like that's possible. Around Gamble 45. Unalakleet and areas out around the eastern parts of Norton Sound, back in the mid to upper 50s, it looks like. 71 in Galena today, 73 in Tanana. South and western temperatures in the 50s and 60s as you get into Lake Iliamna, Bristol Bay. Temps around King Salmon and Dillingham, all in the 50s and 60s. The Alaska Peninsula and areas westward, all cooler, back in the mid-40s today. St. Paul 46, about the same for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Sand Point, one of the outliers there, around 52 degrees this afternoon. Overnight low temps for any place along the Yukon Valley and probably the Kuskokwim, the Alaska Peninsula, the Pribilofs, the Aleutians, all in the 30s and 40s. As you get into Nome and Shishmaref, probably upper 30s to lower 40s tonight. Kotzebue Sound temperatures generally in the upper 30s there for the evening and overnight hours. 27 in Barrow. Kaktovik's looking at 31. Mid-40s for the Tanana Valley. Around Eagle, 39. A little bit cooler out around Tok and Chicken. Mid-40s for Prince William Sound as well as the Kenai Peninsula tonight. Probably colder for Valdez. For areas in the southeast, probably upper 40s to about 50 degrees for Ketchikan and Annette. Highs tomorrow, blazing. 76 in Eagle. Low 70s for the Middle Tanana Valley. Bethel, you're looking at mid 70s as well. A toasty one for you. King Salmon and Dillingham, a little bit cooler than that. 54 in Kodiak. The Kenai Peninsula region as well as Cook Inlet, upper 60s to low 70s. Mid 40s for the Aleutians. 30 in Barrow, 62 in Nome. And southeast back in the 50s with a few areas in the lower 60s the further north you go. Flying weather shows IFR conditions across the North Slope in the morning as well as across the western chain, and areas around Kodiak Island should expect to start with IFR. Lots of improvements for most places there. IFR will still hover in the Gulf. Watch for showers and storms to develop across the middle and upper Yukon, as well as IFR conditions lingering across the central chain and off the Chukchi coast tomorrow. Your past conditions, we've got IFR in there mainly for the north side and mainly for snow showers isolated in the morning for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass. Otherwise VFR if that ends by the morning. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, VFR conditions there, as well as Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, and of course Isabel Pass looking good there. Watch for afternoon storms north of Mentasta, VFR conditions otherwise. Tanita Pass looking good at VFR, and Portage Pass looks like smooth sailing tomorrow. Chilkoot and White Pass will likely start at MVFR, but improvements are expected as you saw on the chart. Freezing levels indicate that colder air is dropping southward. You can still see a long layer of warm air across the Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, and into the middle Yukon Valley, around 8,000 feet or even higher. Across the Gulf, though, things are cooling down. 4,000 to 6,000 foot lines there. The 8,000 foot freezing line is south of Haida Gwaii at this point. Icing potential indicates that there is enough moisture floating around there that it could give you a little bit of trouble. If you're above 5,000 to 6,000 feet, maybe 7,000 feet around Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island to the Kenai Peninsula, and then above 8,000 feet for parts of the central and northern panhandle tomorrow. Again, all we're looking at is light to maybe isolated, moderate at worst. Watch for thunderstorms again across the middle Tanana Valley. Here's the storm track. Tomorrow's jet stream has low pressure lined up from the Kamchatka Peninsula and then well south of the Gulf of Alaska. This is shortcutting Alaska with any storm activity for now, so if you like it, that's great. It doesn't look like it's going to change tomorrow. High pressure is ushering in some of that cooler weather, and some of that is trying to make its way southward into the central and northern parts of the interior and the Brooks Range. And here it comes. Low pressure is dragging that south on 25 to 35 knot winds across the North Slope. Northeasterlies working through the Bering Strait. You can see those at 20 to 30 knots. And then across the Gulf of Alaska, controlled by high pressure here. Kind of a double barrel system there with south and easterly winds working their way around to the northern Gulf. 20 knot winds from the east to west across Bristol Bay and then descending southward back into the North Pacific at 25 to 30. At 3,000 feet, wind speeds are a little bit faster here. 40 knots coming down the west coast and the Kobach and Noatak valleys. 25 to 40 coming through the Bering Strait. North and northwesterly winds coming into the Beaufort Seacoast at 20 knots, and southeasterlies remain gentle across the eastern Gulf, about 10 to 20 there. Light easterly winds also working across the northern Gulf and Kodiak Island, about 10 to 20. Turbulence, any place that we expect to have any bumps would probably be across the western Brooks Range as well as Kotzebue Sound, Seward Peninsula below 4,000 feet, below 6,000 feet for the Kilbucks, out toward Kodiak Island, a few chops there, and also across the central Aleutians below 4,000 feet, and of course anywhere around the vicinity of afternoon storms. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back in just a few minutes with an update on sea ice edge and your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Jim Paranto. The National Weather Service Alaska region has 3 forecast offices strategically located throughout the state that provide weather, hydrologic, and climate forecasts for Alaska and its surrounding waters. One of those offices is located in Fairbanks. Today in the studio I have John Lingus, who is the Warning Coordination Meteorologist at the Fairbanks Forecast Office, and he's going to tell us about his office and what kind of products and services it provides. Welcome to the studio, John.
Thank you, Jim. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. Can you give us a quick overview about the Fairbanks Forecast Office?
Sure can. The National Weather Service office in Fairbanks is located on the University of Alaska campus. We're actually renters and we take up part of a floor in the International Arctic Research Institute, or the AKwx building, on the west ridge of the campus. We are co-located then with the Atmospheric Sciences Department of UAF, which is a great partnership there.
Yeah, and you're 24 hours?
We have 24-hour, 7-day-a-week forecast operations.
Okay, and the general products and services that you provide, what are those?
Well, there's 4 basic types. There are our public forecast products for our 26 weather zones across our northern Alaska, and that covers the land area. Those public forecasts are written in general terms for the overall public. We have marine forecasts that cover 9 marine zones, coastal marine zones that are in use by mariners across northern Alaska waters. And then we also write forecasts for 12 airport locations across northern Alaska. And those 3 types of forecasts are issued all the time, that is every day, 2 to 4 times a day. Then in the summer, actually beginning in as early as May and extending through August and once in a great while into September, we write fire weather forecasts for wildfire concerns, and especially for the land management agencies who are dealing with wildfire. And on top of all those programs, as needed, we write or we issue warnings and advisories for various weather hazards associated with any or all of these programs, these services, as needed and year-round.
What are some of the challenges that you have to endure for your area of responsibility?
Well, I guess one of the most obvious challenges, Jim, is that we have a large area to forecast for. You know, I overlaid this on a map of the lower 48, and it takes up about 10 Midwestern states, the area that we forecast for. We start at the crest of the Alaskan Range, we go all the way north of Barrow, we go from the Canadian border on the east side all the way to the Bering Strait. So it's a lot of real estate.
And a lot of weather happens within that real estate, right? So it's challenging for the forecasters.
You know, sometimes, weather patterns are quiet. We might only get one weather system affecting the area. Other times, when it's very active, we could get 3 or 4 different weather systems affecting our total area. We've got just a lot to look at, a lot to cover, and we have a lot more observations now than we did 20 years ago, but there's still vast areas without weather information. So.
What are some of the unique weather forecasts that you're putting out of your office?
Well, one of the forecasts we began back in the late 90s was a recreational forecast for Mount McKinley. And it's really geared to the upper elevations of the mountain, starting at about 7,000 feet. We have it broken into several layers there in general, and we write some specific forecasts for those layers for the first about 24 hours, like a first 12-hour period and the second 12-hour period. And then we write also a outlook for the next 3 days after that. And we do this basically to serve not only the public on the mountain, but also we align it specifically with the National Park Service and their ranger program on the mountain that begins in early May and then ends in mid-July. So we try to align it with those types of needs. And one of the things we found out about this forecast is, although we can try to provide some detailed information, but mountain weather is highly variable and it changes a lot. But what we found the most useful is the outlook section where their trends are forecast, and that's very critical to planning on the mountain.
Are you doing any experimental forecasts?
Funny you should ask, Jim. Actually, we started over last winter to develop a product called the Offshore Forecast for the Arctic waters. And our coastal waters forecasts go out 60 miles, so if you can imagine where that 60 miles ends north of the Arctic coast, then from that point on, about 100 miles north, we have the Arctic waters, offshore waters forecast, and we divided that area into 3 zones. And it is seasonal. We start at once one of those 3 zones becomes ice-free. It would appear to be normally the western zone. And that begins, like this year, for the first time, was in early July. And Then as the other zones become at least like 50% ice-free, we then add those in. Now this year we only had forecasts for the western zone and the middle zone. The eastern zone never got sufficiently ice-free enough. And then just a couple weeks ago, actually probably within the last week of about November, mid-November, we ended the forecast because the zones had iced up sufficiently then.
Okay. The Storm Ready program, that's a National Weather Service program.
Mm-hmm.
You're involved with that. Can you just touch a little bit on the program and how you're using that in your office?
Well, right now we have two communities that are storm ready, Nome and McGrath. And we just look forward to working with other communities. We've touched base with some of them and given information out. And we know that there's several communities desirous of becoming storm ready. So
And what does it mean to be storm ready?
Well, you know, it really means, I term it as an opportunity to discover how you're prepared to handle weather hazards. That's basically in a nutshell. And so it's a lot about discovering what you already have in place, maybe finding a few things that you need to add. You put those in, and then you can become storm ready. It's a voluntary program. It's just a way to become prepared in a certain way for weather hazards.
Great, that's wonderful. John, thank you for coming into the studio today and imparting all this wonderful knowledge to us. We'll have to have you again soon. Don't be a stranger.
All right.
For you folks out there who would like to know more about the Fairbanks Forecast Office, they have a wonderful website. It's weather.gov/Fairbanks. If you type that in on your browser, you'll go to their forecast website, and you'll be able to see a lot of the information that we talked about here in the interview. Thank you again, John, for coming in.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
It's more beards on an interview we've seen in a long time. Here's a look at the sea ice edge, and you can see that area that we were talking about in open water across the Beaufort Seacoast. Look at that, stretching all the way to the east. A lot of this is actually open. There's very little ice in this section here. There's still a few spots of smaller chunks, but by and large, a large piece of that has broken off in the last couple days. And with that northerly flow, some of this could get compacted a little bit, but a lot of this, the main ice pack is well to the north, and this is not expected to start moving southward anytime soon. So an awful lot of open water there. All the areas in blue under 80%, and in some cases probably down to 0% there. Anytime you want to check out the ice edge from our Alaska Sea Ice program, you can check that out at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice.php. Here's a look at southeast now. Winds will remain light across the inner channels, 10 to about 15 with 3-foot seas in the inside, 4-foot seas as you get into the Clarence Strait. Along the outer coast, 20 to 25 from the south and the east, a little bit more of an easterly direction as you get up toward Yakutat, 25 knots with a 9-foot sea. Winds diminish there on Thursday. Winds remain light for most of the inner channels, the exception of the Clarence Strait, up to 25 knots from the south and east with a 6-foot sea there Thursday, and southerlies outside of Craig and the Dixon entrance at 20 knots with a 9-foot sea. Across south central, we're still dealing with very light and variable winds inside of Prince William Sound and through most of Cook Inlet, 2-foot seas there. Northeasterlies west of the Barrens and down to Shelikof Strait, the winds come up to 25 knots with a 7-foot sea, 20 to 25 across the north and western Gulf with 8 to as high as 10-foot seas outside of the Barren Islands. As you get into Thursday, winds remain light, but we start to see a little bit of a directional shift southeast to southerlies across the Cook Inlet, variable winds around the Barrens, northeasterlies inside of Shelikof Strait, and an easterly flow begins to shift a little bit across the northern Gulf, but most areas are looking at 15-knot winds with a 6-foot sea there on Thursday. For the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, northeasterlies inside the bay with a 9-foot sea, 20-knot winds. South and southwesterlies on the Pacific coast into Kodiak Island, 15 knots with an 8 to 9-foot sea, and northeasterlies coming down the Bering Sea coast with a 6-foot sea on 20 knots. Northwesterly shift there on Thursday. Look for 3-foot seas expected around Castle Cape to Chignik and then down the Pacific coast, 10 knots there, more of a variable flow throughout the day. And inside of Bristol Bay, only 1 foot seas are expected for Thursday. For the Aleutians, a north and westerly wind from Nikolsky westward all the way out toward Kiska and Attu, 20 to 25 knots. A 15-knot wind there from Nikolsky to Atka with an 8-foot sea. More of an easterly flow around Unalaska and southerlies on the Pacific coast. If you were a betting person, you would probably put low pressure pretty close to this area here, wouldn't you? Look for that easterly flow to diminish as we go into Thursday and become a little bit more northwesterly following the exit and movement of low pressure and slightly cooler air. 20 knots in all areas there for the central and eastern region, as well as 15 to 25 from Kiska to Attu with a 6 to 8 foot sea, and that'll be the trend for most areas in the Aleutians as we head into Thursday. For the west coast, northerlies coming down through the northern Bering Strait, or through the northern Bering Sea and through the strait, obviously, 25 to 30 knots, about 7 to 8 foot seas there, 9 foot seas out toward St. Matthew, and northeasterlies from the Kuskokwim Delta and the Bay all the way out toward the Pribilofs with a 4 to 7 foot sea on Wednesday. By Thursday, northerlies take over the entire region. 30 knots will be the strongest in the northern Bering and over St. Lawrence Island. 8 foot seas are expected there. 4 to 7 foot seas across the southern Bering, and out around the Pribilofs, a 20-knot wind from the north should be expected. For the north coast, look for 10 to 15-knot winds for the Beaufort Sea, 3 to maybe 2 foot seas there out around Kaktovik. For the Chukchi coast, northeasterlies 20 to 30 knots from Point Lay down to Point Hope, and northerlies outside of Kotzebue Sound at 30 knots with a 6 foot sea on Wednesday. Winds will diminish around the Chukchi Sea coast as we get into Thursday, about 10 to 15 knots, still holding 3 foot seas there, and light westerlies set up across the Beaufort Sea coast. 2 foot seas are expected for Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, colder air is dropping southward, and with that comes the opportunity for some light snow or maybe just snow showers around the Beaufort Sea coast. Don't be surprised to see freezing fog around the Chukchi coast as we get into tonight. Areas of showers, rainfall that is, across southwest and the eastern chain. We'll see a better chance for some light rainfall. Same goes for southeast. Most of your light rain today around Sitka only netted about 1/10 of an inch. As we get into tomorrow, snow showers are still possible across the eastern Brooks Range. Showers and thunderstorms south of that where temperatures remain in the 70s. We'll watch for warm weather to continue across the Gulf as we head into Thursday with cold weather up north. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.